Being able to clearly demonstrate the benefits of cooperative compensation and seller concessions in the post-NAR settlement era will absolutely deliver more business opportunities to you and, most importantly, an extraordinary value to the buyers and sellers you represent. I'm Daniel Moskowitz, broker in charge for Dunes Real Estate, serving the Hilton Head Island, Bluffton, and surrounding Lowcountry. I'm excited to share several critical points that others are not addressing. I've broken them down into 3 concepts to make them easier to follow. Note, everything I share is in context to my near 2 decades of experience as a South Carolina real estate licensee. So let's buckle up, recognize your value, understand your trade, and go deliver. Concept 1, cooperating compensation. The myth: seller is paying for buyer representation. That is absolutely a myth. Remember, it existed before buyer representation, also known as buyer agency in South Carolina, as it was adopted in the late 90s. It was never about paying for buyer representation, and most importantly, it has never been paid by the seller. Instead, it's always been paid by the listing brokerage as part of their marketing effort. Confused? Ask your broker in charge who gets sued if cooperating compensation is not paid. Spoiler alert, it's the listing brokerage. To the extent of my 2 decades experience in the Hilton Head Island and Bluffton markets of South Carolina, commission has always been negotiable. And when the listing brokerage chooses to offer cooperating compensation as part of their marketing effort, the seller is always required to understand and acknowledge what we are offering as a cooperating compensation, also known as co-broke. Now, why is it often confused as the seller paying for the buyer representation? Well, at some point along the way, whether it was disclosure from anti-racketeering pressures or pressures from buyer brokerages for a more prompt payment, the South Carolina attorney who facilitates the closing for the buyer did that buyer broker a favor by going ahead and extending cooperating commission as a separate line item at closing, which falls under the seller cost as there's not a separate column for listing brokerage expenses. So unfortunately, the appearance of the seller being responsible for the cooperating compensation is reinforced by that closing statement. If you believe it is a requirement of disclosure of funds distribution, then ask yourself, when was the last time you saw a referral brokerage allocation on the closing statement? Concept number 2, cooperating commission. It's entirely about the seller and buyer getting more. So how does it deliver? This is quite simple. There are millions of home buyers every year that are prompted to start looking or get out and see a property that may be exactly what they're looking for. Cooperating commission motivates a massive number of agents to pursue buyers who are not actively looking, like the many in the recent pandemic frenzy years who may have given up. Absent the enticement or motivation of cooperative compensation, the listing brokerage is limiting the tens, hundreds, if not thousands of agents to assist with engaging buyers to help get their listing sold. Think of it as the old wanted bounty posters from the Old West. It's the same concept. Historically speaking, we've not been able to care about how that agent represents their buyer because agency and transaction brokerage did not exist. Rather, we choose to compensate them for the delivery of the buyer that is willing to pay a price satisfactory to our seller. For both the buyer and seller, the benefits are tremendous. The strong majority of clients in our Lowcountry markets obtain financing. Even in the 7- and 8-digit luxury markets of Hilton Head, you have a strong contingent of wealthy people who recognize the benefits of financing or leveraging debt to build wealth. Accordingly, the more cash they have towards a down payment, the more they can afford or reach. This is excellent for both expanding the seller's audience of buyers and encouraging competition for a higher price. How? Well, since commissions as a buyer's expense cannot be mortgaged, and because every dollar a cash buyer has to put toward the down payment gives them more reach, this creates exponential benefit for both buyer and seller. Let me show you with big numbers that are easy to follow, and let's also drip the disclaimer that there is no commission standard, and it is and has always been negotiable. So I'll provide a range of compensation scenarios to convey the benefit. If a primary home buyer has $200,000 to put down and wants the best terms on a mortgage, they're looking at 20% as it helps avoid PMI and have more market options. Since $200,000 is 20% of $1 million, and for the benefit of this example, let's say the listing brokerage is offering a cooperative compensation equal to the amount that happens to be established in their buyer agency agreement, the buyer's looking up to $1 million. Now, the scenario changes completely if the listing brokerage is not offering cooperating compensation or happens to be offering less than what was established between the buyer and their agent. For example, if the buyer's now coming out of pocket 1% or approximately $10,000 to compensate their buyer's agent, then that buyer now looks at the scenario as having approximately $190,000 in cash after compensation payment, and $190,000 is 20% of $950,000. At 2% or $20,000, that buyer now looks at that scenario as having approximately $180,000 in cash after compensating their agent, and $180,000 is 20% of $900,000. At 3% or approximately $30,000, that buyer now looks at the scenario as having approximately $170,000 in cash after compensation to their agent, and $170,000 is 20% of $850,000. You get the point. Absent the additional negotiation of seller concession to pay buyer agent commission, the purchasing power is clearly impaired, and now a financial limitation impacts both the buyer and the seller. Concept 3, cooperating degradation. Even real estate funded media is misleading you. So why participate? Look, be an independent thinker. Rely on facts. The media headlines and content are toxic. They're riddled with inaccuracies anchored in negativity that drive an audience. Remember, it's human nature to believe the bad. It's easy and comes natural to us. After thousands of years, it's ingrained in us as humans. We've survived by focusing most on threats and danger. Needless to say, we're drawn to it. So I ask you to respect the presence of the media story, but give weight in the value and energy to the facts that clearly identify your reality. Here's a few to help you get started. In 2023, sellers using a full-service listing agent to sell their home operated near a 3-decade high of 89%. Yes, 89% of sellers saw the benefit of listing with their agent. The use of a full-service agent has been at its strongest over the past decade, even with the massive infusion of limited service and cost listing models. So how about buyers? In 2023, buyers utilizing a real estate agent was also near an all-time and 3-decade high of 89%. Even technology proficient generations value the knowledge, skill, and home buying experience of an agent. How about fees in your compensation? I highly encourage you to subscribe to 1000 Watt, who delivers the most insightful statistics from consumer surveys. Recently, they took a massive survey and found the majority of consumers agree agents are worth their compensation and valued. Please note, though, this was only when the consumer understood what the role of their agent was and how they were being compensated. So simply be transparent. Disclose, disclose, disclose. Last but not least, look at the massive amount of 5-star reviews out there on real estate agents. Would these exist if all clients were not satisfied? Read them, and you'll understand their demands. However, most importantly, look at the facts of your value and take the opportunity to have meaningful engagements with your clients to explain to them the realities of the headlines versus the settlement. Be their trusted advisor. Conversations to start out with might be that there are no commission standards and the settlement has done nothing to establish how compensation is paid, rather only when and how it is communicated. To bring this all together, 1, the listing brokerage pays cooperating compensation, not the seller. 2, cooperating compensation is massively beneficial as a resource for both seller and buyer. And number 3, recognize your proven story of value, because if you're not telling it, then someone else is filling that void. In another session, we'll talk about the new settlement-inspired wild world of seller concessions, where, when applicable, the seller is literally paying for buyer representation. For now, I'm Daniel Moskowitz, broker in charge of Dunes Real Estate, focused on delivering real estate agents to the highest level of professionalism, client service, and career success in the Hilton Head Island, Bluffton, and surrounding Lowcountry market. Thank you.